So here is a story and we are going to read it. Uh, a triumph over of surgery. Okay, a triumph of surgery means this is the story of title. So let's start reading this story. Tricky, a small dog, is pampered and overfed by his rich mistress. He falls seriously ill and his mistress consults a veterinary surgeon. Does he perform an operation? Does the dog recover? Here is a dog, a pet dog named Tricky. And in this story, you will later know that Tricky owner is very rich, and she overfed her. She gives her too much to eat, and due to this, Tricky falls very ill. So the let's see that did the surgeon, which is a veterinary doctor, mm, is successful in curing or not. So study the story. I was really worried about Tricky this time. So here the author is very really worried about the Tricky. I had pulled up my car when I saw him in the street with his mistress and I was shocked at his appearance. Okay, so when the author was going, he pulled up his car, means he stopped his car. And why he stopped his car? Because uh, he saw that the dog with his mistress was walking and the appearance of dog was very bad. He had become ugly fat, hugely fat. The dog was very fat, like a bloated sausage, with a leg at each corner. Okay, he has become very fat. His eyes, bloodshot, rheumi, started straight ahead, and his tongue lolled from his jaw. So here the author is explaining the appearance of dog. He's saying that his eyes was very fat, and his tongue, and that liquid coming from his mouth, okay, uh, was rolling down. So Mrs. Pumphrey hastened to explain, and in this story the name of the owner of the dog is Mrs. Pumphrey. Okay, he was so listless. Listless means to become very restless. He was so listless, Mr. Harriet, and the name of the veterinary doctor is Mr. Harriet. He seemed to have no energy. I thought he must be suffering from malnutrition, so I have been giving him some little extras between meals to build up. She is saying that the dog have no energy after all. He seems to be very fat and with no energy. So the Mrs. Pumphrey thinks that he is suffering from malnutrition, means he is not getting extra and proper food. So she has started giving him little extra, okay, between the meals, so that she can build his energy. Some malt, cod liver oil, and a ball of Horlicks at night to make him sleep. Nothing much really. She is giving malt, cod liver oil, and Horlicks. Okay. And did you cut down on the sweet things as I told you? As the doctor asked, did you cut down the sweet things as he had told previously? Oh, I did for a bit, but he seemed to be so weak I had to relent. Uh, she said that I have tried, but he was looking so weak that I have to give him extra food. He does love cream cakes and chocolates so. She further added that the dog loves very much chocolate and cakes. I can't bear to refuse him. And she said that I love him very much that I cannot refuse anything that he demanded, the dog demanded. Okay. I looked down again at the little dog. So Mr. Harriet again looked down at the little dog. That was the trouble. Okay, means that dog was looking very fat. Tricky's only fault was greed. Mr. Harriet is urging that the dog was very greedy. He had never been known to refuse food. Means if anyone offer him any food, he will never refuse it. He will never show it no. He always accept it and he will eat it. He would tackle a meal at any hour of the day or night. And next, the author is saying that he will eat at any hour of the day or night, whether it's day or night, he will always ready to eat. And I wondered about all the things Mrs. Pumphrey hadn't mentioned. And now the Mr. Harriet is also thinking about all the things that Mrs. Pumphrey is not telling, but those are bad for his health. Are you giving him plenty of exercise? Then the author asked him, Are you giving him exercise? Well, he has little walks with me, as you can see. Okay, then see that I allow him to walk with me, but Hogkin the gardener has been down with lumbago, so there has been no ring throwing lately. Next, she is saying that Hodkin is gardener, and he plays a game called ring throw with the dog, which is very physically good for the dog. But now he is suffering from lumbago, so he cannot play with him. Okay, look at this picture. This is Mr. Harriet, the veterinary doctor, and this is Mrs. Pumphrey. And looked at the fat dog. I did tried to sound severe. Now I really mean this. If you don't cut his food right down and give him more exercise, he is going to be really ill. So here the Mr. Harriet is trying to be strict, and he's saying that if you will not cut much food and give him plenty of exercise, he is going to ill. You must harden your heart and keep him on a very strict diet. He is adding up that you must hard your heart and give him very strict diet. Mrs. Pumphrey wrung her hands, means she puts her hand in one hand. Oh, I will, Mr. Harriet, and she promised that I will give him a strict diet. I am sure you are right, but it is so difficult, so very difficult. She further added that you are saying right, but going on a strict diet is very difficult because she loved the dog very much. She set off head down along the road as if determined to put the new regime into practice immediately. And she started walking along the road and putting her head down, and it was looking that she will put the strict diet. I watched their progress with growing concern. So the author was noticing the dog's progress. Tricky was tottering along in his little tweed coat. He had a whole wardrobe of these coats for food for the cold weather and a raincoat for the wet days. Means here the author is saying that Tricky has a wardrobe. Wardrobe means a cupboard for placing clothes, and he have very different types of coats for cold weather, coats for rainy days. He struggled on drooping in his harness. I thought it would not be long before I heard from Mrs. Pumphrey. The expected call came within a few days, and author was expecting that some call will come from that side, and that accepted call come within few days. Mrs. Pumphrey was distraught, means she was very depressed. Tricky would eat nothing. She said that on telephone that Tricky is not eating anything, refused even his favorite dishes, and he has refused his favorite dishes also. And besides, he had bouts of vomiting, and means that she is vomiting. Okay, he spent all his time lying on a rug, panting. Means he is lying on the floor and he is always panting. Panting means to breathe heavily. Okay, didn't want to go for walks. And she further added that he do not want to go out for walk. Okay, uh, didn't want to do anything and not want to do anything. I had made my plans in advance. The only way to get Tricky out of the house for a period, and the author here has made his plans that the only way to get out Tricky and to keep him healthy was to take out him from the house for some period of time, for about fourth night to be kept under observation. Here fourth night means 2 weeks. The poor lady almost swooned. She was sure he would pine and die if he did not see her every day. Mrs. Pumphrey was very depressed when the dog was going away from her. But I took a firm line. But I took a firm line. But the author means Mr. Harriet took very firm line. Tricky was very ill and was the only way to save him. In fact, I thought it best to take him without delay. And he said that the only way to save was him to take him without delay. Okay. Followed by Mrs. Pumphrey wailings, I marched out to the car carrying the little dog wrapped in a blanket. And he took out the dog out of the house and put it into the car wrapped in a blanket. The entire staff was roused and maids rushed in and out, banging his day bed, his night bed, and favorite cushions, toys, and rubber rings, breakfast bowl, lunch bowl, supper bowl. And the entire staff in the very big bungalow and maids were very busy. They were busy in what thing? They were taking out all types of beds for that dog. Night bed, day bed, favorite cushions, favorite chairs, favorite toys, favorite drinks, and breakfast ball, lunch ball, supper ball. Realizing that my car would never hold all the stuff. So here the Mr. Harriet realized that all these things will not come out in that small car. I started to drive away. He started to drive. As I moved off, Mrs. Pumphrey, with a despairing cry, threw an armful of the little coats through the window. When he was going, in the he can see Mrs. Pumphrey crying for the dog. I looked in the mirror before I turned the corner of the drive. Everybody was in tears. He was looking in the side mirrors of the car, that everybody, including the staff, was in tears. Means they were sad. Out on the road, I glanced down at the pathetic animal gasping on the seat by my side. And then author goes on the main road and he see the dog which was sitting on the seat beside him. I patted the head and Tricky made a brave effort to wag his tail. Then the author patted his head and Tricky made a very brave effort to uh, steer his tail. Poor old lad, I said, you haven't a kick in you, but I think I know a cure for you. He said that, poor lady, you cannot put a strict diet, but I know a way in which I can cure this oh, small dog. At the surgery, the household dogs surged around me. Means surgery means there was a home in which all types of dog were kept, and this is called surgery. The household dogs surged around me. Means all the household dogs come around the author. Tricky looked down at the noisy pack with dull eyes, and when put down lay motionless on the carpet. And when the author put down the Tricky was not interested in his surroundings. He lay motionless on the carpet. The other dogs, after sniffing round him for a few seconds, decided he was an uninteresting object and ignored him. Okay, then it is saying that the dog who were there started sniffing him. Sniffing means started smelling through the nose, and they come to the conclusion that it was very uninteresting and boring, so they ignored him. I made up a bed for him in a warm loose box next to one where other dogs slept. Then author make a warm bed that was next to the other dogs. For 2 days, I kept an eye on him, giving him no food but plenty of water. For 2 days, the author gives him plenty of water but no food. At the end of the second day, he started to show some interest in his surroundings, and on third, he began to whimper when he heard the dogs in the yard. Uh, for the 2 days, he do nothing, but on the second day, he started taking interest in her surroundings, and in third day, he started to making friends with the other dogs that were present in that yard. When I opened the door, Tricky trotted out and was immediately engulfed by Joe, the greyhound, and his friends. Here the author is peeping through the door, and he see that Tricky is playing with other dogs like Joe. Okay. After rolling him over and thoroughly inspecting him, the dogs moved down the garden. The dogs were inspecting him, and after inspecting him, the dogs moved out. Okay, down the garden. Tricky followed them, rolling slightly with his surplus fat. and Tricky was following them, and his body was very loose with very high amount of fat. When I opened the door, Tricky, this paragraph has done. Later that day I was present at feeding time. Okay. And later on that day he was present at giving food to the dogs. I watched while Tristan slopped the food into the bowls. He watched that a dog named Tristan, okay, who was very eating hurriedly the foods that were present in the bowls. There was the usual headlong rush followed by the sounds of high speed eating. The dogs were eating very fastly. Every dog knew that if he fell behind the others, he was liable to have some competition for the last part of his meal. Here is that the competition for food. Okay, look here, he was peeping from the door. Next, when they had finished, Tricky took a walk round the sounding balls, licking casually inside one or two of them. Okay, and when they have finished, Tricky came very slowly and he was taking slightly interest. Next day, an extra ball was put out for him, and next day, extra ball was put out for him. And I was pleased to see him jostling his way towards it. And the author is very pleased, very happy to see that he was taking interest in the ball in which he was served. From then on his progress was rapid. He had no medicinal treatment of any kind, but all day he ran about with the dogs, joining in their friendly scrimmage. um, uh, he is saying that after that day the progress was very fast, and the doctor was not type of any operation, there was not any medical treatment. Only the author do that, he allowed the dog to run with another dog and give him very much physical exercise. He discovered the joys of being bowled over, tramped on, and squashed every minute. Okay, so the Tricky discovered the joy of eating food in the bowl, and he was tramping and squashing every minute. Means he was doing exercises. He became an accepted member of the gang, and he became the member of the gang of the dogs, an unlikely, silky little object among the saggy crew. All the dogs were very saggy, and he was very small, silk in color. Okay, he was alike, means different from all the gang, fighting like a tiger for his share at meal times. And he used to fight like a tiger for his share of food when there was meal time for all the dogs, and hunting rats in the old hen house at night. And he used to hunt dogs at the night, hunt rats in the hen house. Means there was a farm of hen and he used to hunt rat. He had never had such a time in his life, and as he was pampered in a very rich family, he has never this type of time in his life. All the while Mrs. Pumphrey hovered anxiously in the background, ringing a dozen times a day for the latest bulletins. And when the dog was inside the yard, Mrs. Pumphrey on other side called many times, and she was also asking the latest news what is happening to her dog. I dodged the questions about whether his questions were being turned regularly or his correct coat worn according to the weather. The author ignored all the things about the questions and the coat. Okay, but I was able to tell her that the little fellow was out of danger and called welsking rapidly. And the author told her on the phone that now Tricky is out of danger, he is safe, and he is improving his health very rapidly. Convalescing means an improving body. The word convalescing seemed to do something to Mrs. Pumphrey. She started to bring round fresh eggs, 2 dozen at a time. So when she heard that the health of Tricky was improving, she started to send fresh eggs, 2 dozen fresh eggs, okay, at one time, to build up Tricky's strength. And why she was sending them? To build up Tricky's strength, to make him very powerful. For a happy period, my partners and I had two eggs each for breakfast. And instead of giving eggs to the dog, the author and his partner started eating two eggs each at the breakfast. But when the bottles of wine began to arrive, the real possibilities of the situation began to dawn on the household. And after, she also started sending wine. It was to enrich Tricky's blood. It was to enhance the blood of Tricky. Lunch became a ceremonial occasion with two glasses of wine before and several during the meal. And the author is trying to say that his lunch became very occasional. It was like a festival dinner. Okay, next. We could hardly believe it when the brandy came to put a final age on Tricky's constitution, and at last a brandy came. Brandy means a very good wine. For a few nights, the fine spirit was rolled around, inhaled, and reverently drunk. Means the author is trying to say that for a few days he has eaten like king. They were days of deep content. Means those days he was very satisfied and handy. Huh. Happy. Starting well with the extra egg in the morning, improved and sustained by the midday wine, and finishing luxuriously round the fire with the brandy. Means in those days in morning he used to eat eggs. uh, he improved and sustained by the midway wine and finishing luxuriously brandy. It was a temptation to keep Tricky on as a permanent guest, but I knew Mrs. Pumphrey was suffering, and after a fourth night, I felt compelled to phone and tell her that the little dog had recovered and was awaiting collection. The author wants that he wants to put the dog for forever, but he thinks about Mrs. Pumphrey and said that I will only put your dog for 2 weeks. He called the Mrs. Pumphrey and said that now the health of Tricky is improved and you can take her out from here. Within minutes, about 30 feet of gleaming black metal drew up outside the surgery. Means within minutes, a very long car came at the surgery. Okay, it was gleaming black, means very high class car. The chauffeur opened the door, and I could just make out the figure of Mrs. Pumphrey, almost lost in the interior. Okay, here the chauffeur, the personal driver, opened the door, and Mrs. Pumphrey was there. Her hands were tightly clasped in front of her. When she was holding her hands, her lips trembled. She said that, "Oh, Mr. Harriet, do tell me the truth. Is he really better?" She started to saying that, "Is he really good?" Then the author says that, "Yes, he is fine. There is no need for you to get out of the car. I will go and fetch him." He said that there is no need of you to come out. I will go and take out him from the surgery from the yard. I walked through the house into the garden. The author goes from house to garden. A mass of dogs was hurtling round and round the lawn, and in their midst, ears flapping, tail waving, was the little golden figure of Tricky. Means Tricky was among the all old dogs. In 2 weeks, he had been transformed into a lid. Lid means a man with muscular muscles, hard muscled animal. Means he had transformed into a very healthy and very muscular man. He was keeping up well in the pack. Means he has come into a standard with the pack, stretching out in great bounds, his chest almost brushing the ground, and his chest was brushing the ground. I carried him along the passage to the front of the house. The author carried him to the front of the house. The chauffeur was still holding the car door open, and when Tricky saw his mistress, he took off from my arms in a tremendous leap and sailed into Mrs. Pumphrey's lap. When he is saying that when he goes out, the driver was still had opened the car, and Tricky can see her mistress. So the Tricky got off from the Mr. Harriet arm and tremendously leap and sailed into Mrs. Pumphrey's lap. She gave a startled oh. After seeing Tricky, Mrs. Pumphrey was surprised and then had to defend herself as he swarmed over her, licking her face and barking. And Tricky started licking her face and barking, and for this she had to defend herself. During the excitement, I helped the chauffeur to bring out the beds, toys, cushions, coats, and balls, none of which have been used. Means all the useless things that like toys, cushions, coats, balls, he all started to take out, which they were not used. As the car moved away, Mrs. Pumphrey leaned out of the window. As the car moved away, Mrs. Pumphrey go out from the window means she only leaned out. Okay, take out her head down. Tears shone in her eyes. She was very happy, and due to this, tears were coming from her eyes. Her lips trembled. "Oh, Mr. Harriet," she cried, "how can I thank you? This is a triumph of surgery." And she said that this is a triumph of surgery means there was no need of surgery. James Harriet sausages finely minced meat stuffed into long cylindrical cases and divided into small lengths by twisting or tying means meat. Rheumi, a watery discharge from a mucous membrane, especially of the nose or eyes. Rheumi, liquid coming from eyes and nose. Listless. Listless means lacking energy and enthusiasm. Lumbago, muscular pain in the lower part of the back. Its pain. Regime, prescribed course of exercise and diet. Distraught, extremely worried. Surgery, a place where a doctor, a dentist, or a veterinary surgeon treats patients. Scrimmage, a rough or confused struggle. Convalescing, recovering from an illness. Lead, flexible. Talk about it. What kind of a person do you think the narrator, a veterinary surgeon, is? Would you say he is tactful as well as full of common sense? Do you think Tricky was happy to go home? What do you think will happen now? Do you think this is a real life episode or mere fiction? Or is it mixture of both? Uh, this episode describes the silly behavior of a rich woman who is foolishly indulgent, perhaps because she is lonely. Do you think such people are merely silly, or can their actions cause harm to others? Do you think there are also parents like Mrs. Pumphrey? What would you have done if you were a member of the staff in Mrs. Pumphrey's household? A neighbor? What would your life have been like in general? What would you have done if you were in the narrator's place? Suggested reading Rikki Tikki Tavi by Rudyard Kipling, Dog Stories by James Herriot, A Jew in My Luggage by Gerald Dorrell, A Tiger Comes to Town by R.K. Narayan. Time. The butterfly counts not months but moments and has time enough. Time is a wealth of change, but the clock in its parody makes it mere change and no wealth. Let your life lightly dance on the edge of time like dew on the tip of a leaf. Rabindranath Tagore. So this chapter is finished. Next chapter. Next chapter is very interesting one. The Thief's Story. It is my favorite one because it is written by Ruskin Bond. The Thief's Story. A story of a thief. A young boy makes friend with Anil. Here is a young boy. I can say that he was 12 years old or 15 years old. And he makes friend with Anil. Anil trusts him completely and employs him. When they make good friends, Anil trusts him completely and keep him with him. Does the boy betray his trust? Then what happens in the story? Does the boy betray him or he is a very loyal friend? So the story starts here and enjoy it. It is very special one. I was still a thief when I meet Anil, and though only 15, I was an experienced and fairly successful hand. Anil was watching a wrestling match when I approached him. He was about 25, a tall, lean fellow, and he looked easygoing, kind, and simple enough for my purpose. I hadn't had much luck of late and thought I might be able to get into the young man's confidence. You look a bit of a wrestler yourself, I said. A little flattery helps in making friends. So do you, he replied, which put me off for a moment because at that time I was rather thin. Well, I said modestly, I do wrestle a bit. What is your name? Hari Singh. I lied. I took a new name every month. That kept me ahead of the police and my former employers. After this introduction, Anil talked about the well oiled wrestlers who were grunting, lifting, and throwing each other about. I did not have much to say. Anil walked away. I followed casually. Hello again, he said. I gave him my most appealing smile. I want to work for you, I said, but I can't pay you. I thought that over for a minute. Perhaps I had misjudged by man. I asked, can you feed me? He asked, can you cook? I can cook, I lied again. If you can cook, then I can feed you. He took me to his room over the Jumna sweet shop and told me I could sleep on the balcony. But the meal I cooked that night must have been terrible because Anil gave it to a stray dog and told me to be off. But I just hung around, smiling in my most appealing way, and he could not help laughing. Later, he patted me on the hand and said, never mind, he would teach me to cook. He also taught me to write my name and said he would soon teach me to write whole sentences and to add numbers. I was grateful. I knew that once I could write like an educated man, there would be no limit to what I could achieve. It was quite pleasant working for Anil. I made the tea in the morning and then would take my time buying the day's supplies, usually making a profit about a rupee a day. I think he knew I made a little money this way, but he did not seem to mind. Anil made money by fits and starts. He would borrow one week and lend the next. He kept worrying about his next check, but as soon as it arrived, he would go out and celebrate. It seems he wrote for magazines, a queer way to make a living. One evening, he came home with a small bundle of notes, saying he had just sold a book to a publisher. At night, I saw him tuck the money under the mattress. I had been working for Anil for almost a month, and apart from cheating on the shopping, had not done anything in my line of work. I had every opportunity for doing so. Anil had given me a key to the door and could come and go as I pleased. He was the most trusting person I had ever met, and that is why it was so difficult to rob him. It is easy to rob a greedy man because he can afford to be robbed, but it is difficult to rob a careless man. Sometimes he doesn't even notice he has been robbed and takes all the pleasure out of the work. Well, it's time I did some real work, I told myself. I am out of practice, and if I don't take out the money, he will only waste it on his friends. After all, he doesn't even pay me. Anil was as asleep. A beam of moonlight stepped over the balcony and fell on the bed. I sat up on the floor considering the situation. If I took the money, I could catch the 10:30 express to Lucknow. Slipping out of the blanket, I crept up to the bed. Anil was sleeping peacefully. His face was clear and unlined. Even I had more marks on my face, though mine were mostly scars. My hand slid under the mattress, searching for the notes. When I found them, I drew them out without a sound. Anil sighed in his sleep, and turned on his side towards me. I was startled and quickly crawled out of the room. When I was on the road, I began to run. I had the notes at my waist, held there by the string of my pajamas. I slowed down to a walk and counted the notes. 600 rupees in 50s. I could live like an oil rich Arab for a week or two. When I reached the station, I did not stop at the ticket office. I had never bought a ticket in my life, but dashed straight to the platform. The Lucknow Express was just moving out. The train had still to pick up speed, and I should have been able to jump into one of the carriages. But I hesitated for some reason I can't explain, and I lost the chance to get away. When the train had gone, I found myself standing alone on the deserted platform. I had no idea where to spend the night. I had no friends, believing that friends were more trouble than help, and I did not want to make anyone curious by staying at one of the small hotels near the station. The only person I knew really well was the man I had robbed. Leaving the station, I walked slowly through the bazaar. In my short career as a thief, I had made a study of men's faces when they had lost their goods. The greedy man showed fear, the rich man showed anger, the poor man showed acceptance. But I knew that Anil's face when he discovered that when he discovered the theft would show only a touch of sadness, not for the loss of money, but for the loss of trust. I found myself in the Maidan and sat down on a bench. The night was chilly. It was early November, and a light drizzle added to my discomfort. Soon it was raining quite heavily. My shirt and pajama stuck to my skin, and a cold wind blew the rain across my face. My shirt and pajamas stuck to my skin, and a cold wind blew the rain across my face. I went back to Bazaar and sat down in the shelter of the clock tower. The clock showed midnight. I felt for the notes. They were damp from the rain. Anil's money. In the morning, he would probably have given me 2 or 3 rupees to go to the cinema, but now I had it all. I could not cook his meals, run to the bazaar, or learn to write the whole sentences anymore. I had forgotten about them in the excitement of the theft. Whole sentences I knew I could one day bring me more than a few hundred rupees. It was a simple matter to steal, and sometimes just as simple to be caught. But to be a really big man, a clever and respected man, was something else. I should go back to Anil, and told myself, if only to learn to read and write. I hurried back to the room, feeling very nervous. for it is much easier to steal something than to return it undetected. I opened the door quietly, then stood in the doorway. In clouded moonlight, Anil was still asleep. I crept to the head of the bed, and my hand came up with the notes. I felt his breath on my hand. I remained still for a minute. Then my hand found the edge of the mattress. I and slipped under it with the notes. I awoke late next morning to find that Anil had already made the tea. He stretched out his hands towards me. There was a 50 rupee note between his fingers. My heart sank. I thought I had been discovered. I made some money yesterday, he explained. Now you will be paid regularly. My spirits rose. But when I took the note, I saw it was still wet from the night's rain. Today we will start writing sentences, he said. He knew, but neither his lips nor his eyes showed anything. I smiled at Anil in my most appealing way, and the smile came by itself, without any effort. Ruskin Bond. Glossary. Flattery, insincere praise, modestly, without boasting in a humble way. Grunting, making low guttural sound. Appealing, attractive, unlined, showing no sign of worry or anxiety. Think about it. What are Hari Singh's reaction to the prospect of receiving an education? Do they change over time? Hint. Compare, for example, the thought I knew that once I could write like an educated man, there would be no limit to what I could achieve. With these latter thoughts, whole sentences I knew could one day bring me more than a few hundred rupees. It was a simple matter to steal, and sometimes just as simple to be caught. But to be a really big man, a clever and respected man, was something else. What makes him return to Anil? Why does not Anil hand the thief over to the police? Do you think most people would have done so? In what ways is Anil different from such employees? Do you think do you think people like Anil and Hari are found only in fiction, or are there such people in real life? Do you think it a significant detail in the story that Anil is a struggling writer? Does this explain his behavior in any way? Have you met anyone like Hari Singh? Can you think and imagine the circumstances that can turn a 15-year-old boy into a thief? Where, where is the story set? You can get clues from the names of the persons and places mentioned in it. Which language or languages are spoken in these places? Do you think the characters in the story spoke to each other in English? He said it with arsenic by Ruskin Bond, Vanka by Anton Chekhov, A Scandal in Bohemia by Arthur Conan Doyle. Next, The Midnight Visitor. Auzeval, a secret agent, is expecting to get a very important report. Another secret agent, Max, threatens him with a pistol, demanding the report. Does Auzeval outwit him? Auzeval did not fit any description of a secret agent Fowler had ever read. Following him down the musty corridor of the gloomy French hotel, where Auzeval had a room, Fowler felt let down. It was a small room on the sixth and top floor, and scarcely a setting for a romantic adventure. Auzeval was, for one thing, fat, very fat. And then there was his accent. Though he spoke French and German passably, he had never altogether lost the American accent he had brought to Paris from Boston 20 years ago. You are disappointed, Ausable said wheezily over his shoulder. You were told that I was a secret agent, a spy, dealing in espionage and danger. You wished to meet me because you are a writer, young and romantic. You envisioned mysterious figures in the night, the crack of pistols, drugs in the wine. Instead, you have spent a dull evening in a French music hall with a sloppy fat man who, instead of having messages slipped into his hand by dark eyed beauties, gets only a prosaic telephone call making an appointment in his room. You have been bored. The fat man chuckled to himself as he unlocked the door of his room and stood aside to let his frustrated guest enter. You are disillusioned, Ausable told him. But take cheer, my young friend. Presently, you will see a paper, a quite important paper for which several men and women have risked their lives. Come to me. Some day soon that paper may well affect the course of history. In that thought is drama, is there not? As he spoke, Isabel closed the door behind him. Then he switched on the light, and as the light came on, Fowler had his first authentic thrill of the day. For halfway across the room, a small automatic pistol in his hand, stood a man. Ausable blinked a few times. Max, he wheezed, you gave me a quiet start. I thought you were in Berlin. What are you doing here in my room? Max was slender, a little less than tall, with features that suggested slightly the crafty, pointed countenance of a fox. There was about him, aside from the gun, nothing especially menacing. The report, he murmured, the report that is being brought to you tonight concerning some new missiles. I thought I would take it from you. It will be safer in my hands than in yours. Ausable moved to an armchair and sat down heavily. I am going to raise the devil with the management this time, and you can bet on it, he said grimly. This is the second time in a month that somebody has got into my room through that nuisance of a balcony. Fowler's eyes went to the single window of the room. It was an ordinary window, against which now the night was pressing blackly. Balcony, Max said, with a rising inflection. No, a pass key. I did not know about the balcony. It might have saved me some trouble had I known. It is not my balcony, Ausable said with extreme irritation. It belongs to next apartment. He glanced explanatorily at Fowler. You see, he said, this room used to be a part of large unit, and the next room through that door there used to be the living room. It had the balcony which extends under my window now. You can get onto it from the empty room in two doors down, and somebody did last month. The management promised to block it off, but they haven't. Max glanced at Fowler, who was standing stiffly not far from Ausable, and waved the gun with a commanding gesture. Please sit down, he said. We have a wait of half an hour, I think. 31 minutes, Ausable said moodily. The appointment was for 12:30. I wish I knew how you learned about the report, Max. The little spy smiled heavily. And we wish we knew how your people got the report. but no harm has been done. I will get it back tonight. What is that? Who is at the door? Fowler jumped at the sudden knocking at the door. Augeval just smiled. That will be the police, he said. I thought that such an important paper as the one we are waiting for should have a little extra protection. I told them to check on me to make sure everything was all right. Max bit his lip nervously. The knocking was repeated. What will you do now, Max? Auzeval asked. If I do not answer the door, they will enter anyway. The door is unlocked, and they will not hesitate to shoot. Max's face was black with anger as he backed swiftly towards the window. He swung a leg over the sill. Send them away, he warned. I will wait on the balcony. Send them away, or I will shoot and take my chances. The knocking at the door became louder and the voice was raised. Mr. Augeval, Mr. Augeval, Mr. Augeval, Mr. Augeval. Keeping the body, keeping the body twisted, keeping the body twisted so that his gun still covered the fat man and his guest made the man at the window grasp the frame with his free hand to support himself. Then he swung his other leg up and over the window sill. The door knob turned. Swiftly, Max pushed with his left hand to free himself from the sill and dropped to the balcony. And then, as he dropped, he screamed once shrilly. The door opened, and a waiter stood there with a tray, a bottle, and two glasses. Here is the drink you ordered for when you returned, he said, and set the tray on the table, deftly uncorked the bottle, and left the room. White-faced Fowler stared after him, but he stammered, "The police." There were no police, Ausable sighed. Only Henry, whom I was expecting. But want that man out on the balcony? Fowler began. No, said Ausable, he won't return. You see, my friend, there is no balcony. Robert Arthur. Glossary: romantic, imaginative, having a fantastic view of reality, passably, just well enough, tolerably well. Espionage, spying, espionage, sloppy, hair carelessly dressed. Prosaic, ordinary, chuckled, laughed quietly without opening his mouth. Wheezed, spoke, breathing noisily and heavily. Missiles, weapons directed by remote control or automatically. Shrilly, piercingly in a high pitch. Think about it. Ausable did not fit any description of a secret agent Fowler had ever read. What do secret agents in books and films look like? In your opinion, discuss in groups or in class some stories or movies featuring spies, detecting and secret agents, detectives and secret agents, and compare their appearances with that of Isabel in this story. You may mention characters from the fiction in language other than English. In English fiction, you may have come across Sherlock Holmes, Hercule Poirot, or Miss Marple. Have you watched any movies featuring James Bond? How does Ausable manage to make Max believe that there is a balcony attached to his room? Look back at his detailed description of it. What makes it a convincing story? Look back at the story. When do you think Ausable thought of his plan of getting rid of Max? Do you think he had worked out his plan in detail right from the beginning? Or did he make up a plan taking advantage of events as they happened? In the story, Ausable showed a great presence of mind or the ability to think quickly and act calmly and wisely in a situation or danger and surprise. Give examples from your own experience or narrate a story which shows someone's presence of mind. Discuss what you do in the situations described below. Remember that presence of mind comes out of a state of mental preparedness. If you have thought about possible problems or dangers and about how to act in such situation, you have a better chance of dealing with such situation if they do arouse. A small fire starts in your kitchen, a child starts to choke on a piece of food, an electrical appliance starts to hiss and gives out sparks, a bicycle knocks down a pedestrian, it rains continuously for more than 24 hours, a member of your family does not return home at the usual or expected time. You may suggest other situations. After 20 years, the stolen bacillus, the face on the wall, haiku, an old pond, a frog jump in the sound of water, right at my feet, and when did you get here, snail? The above two poems are examples of haiku. Haiku is a poetic form and a type of poetry from Japanese culture. Haiku combines form, content, and language in a meaningful yet compact form. The most common form of haiku is three short lines. The theme include nature, feelings, or experiences. 104. A question of trust. It is said that you must set a thief to catch a thief, but it is also said that there is a honor among thieves. Which saying does this story illustrate? Everyone thought that Horace Danby was a good, honest citizen. He was about 50 years old and unmarried, and he lived with a housekeeper who worried over his health. In fact, he was usually very well and happy, except for the attacks of hay fever in summer. He made locks and was successful enough at his business to have two helpers. Yes, Horace Danby was good and respectable, but not completely honest. 15 years ago, had served his first and only sentence in a prison library. He loved rare, expensive books, so he robbed a safe every year. Each year he planned carefully just what he would do, stole enough to last for 12 months, and secretly bought the books he loved through an agent. Now, walking in the bright July sunshine, he felt sure that this year's robbery was going to be as successful as all others. For 2 weeks, he had been studying the house at Sotover Grange, looking at its rooms, its electric wiring, its paths, and its garden. This afternoon, the two servants who remained in the Grange while the family was in London had gone to the movies. Horace saw them go and he felt happy in spite of a little tickle of hay fever in his nose. He came out from behind the garden wall, his tools carefully packed in a bag on his back. There were about 15,000 pounds worth of jewels in the Grange safe. If he sold them one by one, he expected to get at least 5,000, enough to make him happy for another year. There were three very interesting books coming up for sale in the autumn. Now he would get the money he wanted to buy them. He had seen the housekeeper hang the key to the kitchen door on a hook outside. He put on a pair of gloves, took the key, and opened the door. He was always careful not to leave any fingerprints. A small dog was lying in the kitchen. It stirred, made a noise, and moved its tail in a friendly way. "All right, Sari," Horace said as he passed. All you had to do keep dogs quiet was to call them by their right names and show them love. The safe was in the drawing room.
behind a rather poor painting. Horace wondered for a moment whether he should collect pictures instead of books, but they took up too much room. In a small house, books were better. There was a great bowl of flowers on the table, and Horace felt his nose tickle. He gave a little sneeze and then put down his bag. He carefully arranged his tools. He had 4 hours before the servants returned. The safe was not going to be hard to open. After all, he had lived with locks and safes all his life. The burglar alarm was poorly built. He went into the hall to cut its wire. He came back and sneezed loudly as the smell of the flowers came to him again. How foolish people are when they own valuable things, Horace thought. A magazine article had described this house, giving a plan of all the rooms and a picture of this room. The writer have even mentioned that the painting hid a safe. But Horace found that flowers were hindering him in his work. He buried his face in a handkerchief. Then he heard a voice say from the doorway, "What is it? A cold or hay fever?" Before he could think, Horace said hay fever and found himself sneezing again. The voice went on, "You can cure it with a special treatment. If you find out just what plant gives you the disease. I think you would better see a doctor if you are serious about your work. I heard you from the top of the house just now." It was quite kindly voice, but one with firmness in it. A woman was standing in the doorway, and Sari was rubbing against her. She was young, quite pretty, and was dressed in red. She walked to the fireplace and straightened the ornaments there. "Down, Sari," she said. "Anyone would think I would been away for a month." She smiled at Horace and went on. "However, I came back just in time, though I did not expect to meet a burglar." Horace had some hope because she seemed to be amused at meeting him. He might avoid trouble if he treated her in the right way. He replied, "I didn't expect to meet one of the family." She nodded. "I see what an inconvenience it is for you to meet me. What are you going to do?" Horace said, "My first thought was to run." "Of course you could do that, but I would telephone the police and tell them all about you. You would get they would get you at once." Look at this lady, and here is Horace Granby. Horace said, "I would of course cut the telephone wires first." And then he hesitated, a smile on his face. "I would make sure that you could do nothing for some time. A few hours would be enough." She looked at him seriously. "You would hurt me." Horace paused and then said, "I think I was trying to frighten you when I said that." "You didn't frighten me," Horace suggested. "It would be nice if you would forget you ever saw me. Let me go." The voice was suddenly sharp. "Why should I? You are going to rob me. If I let you go, you will only rob someone else. Society must be protected from men like you." Horace smiled. "I am not a man who threatens society. I steal only from those who have a lot of money. I steal for a very good reason, and I hate the thought of prison." She laughed and he begged, thinking that he had persuaded her. "Look, I have no right to ask you for anything, but I am desperate. Let me go, and I promise never to do this kind of thing again. I really mean it." She was silent, watching him closely. Then she said, "You are really afraid of going to prison, are not you?" She came over to him, shaking her head. "I have always liked the wrong kind of people." She picked up a silver box from the table and took a cigarette from it. Horace, eager to please her and seeing that she might help him, took off his gloves and gave her his cigarette lighter. You will let me go. He held the lighter towards her. Yes, but only if you will do something for me. Anything you say. Before we left for London, I promised my husband to take my jewels to our bank, but I left them here in the safe. I want to wear them to a party tonight, so I came down to get them. But Horace smiled. You have forgotten the numbers to open the safe, haven't you? Yes, replied the young lady. Just leave it to me, and you will have them within an hour. But I will have to break your safe. Don't worry about that. My husband won't be here for a month, and I will have the safe mended by that time. And within an hour, Horace had opened the safe, given her the jewels, and gone happily away. For 2 days he kept his promise to the kind young lady. On the morning of the third day, however, he thought of the books he wanted and he knew he would have to look for another safe. But he never got the chance to begin his plan. By noon, a policeman had arrested him for the jewel robbery at Sotover Grange. His fingerprints, for he had opened the safe without gloves, were all over the room, and no one believed him when he said that the wife of the owner of the house had asked him to open the safe for her. The wife herself, a grey haired, sharp tongued woman of 60, said that the story was nonsense. Horace is now the assistant librarian in the prison. He often thinks of the charming, clever young lady who was in the same profession as he was and who tricked him. He gets very angry when anyone talks about honor among thieves. Victor Canning, glossary, hay fever, a disorder affecting nose and throat caused by allergy to pollen or dust. Did you begin to suspect before the end of the story that the lady was not the person Horace Danby took her to be? If so, at what point did you realize this and how? What are the subtle ways in which the lady manages to deceive Horace Danby into thinking she is the lady of the house? Why does not Horace suspect that something is wrong? Horace Downby was good and respectable, but not completely honest. Why do you think this description is apt for Horace? Why can't he be categorized as a typical thief? Horace Danby was a meticulous planner, but still he faltered. Where did he go wrong and why? Do you think Horace Danby was unfairly punished or that he deserved what he got? Do intentions justify actions? Would you like Horace Danby do something wrong if you thought your ends justified the means? Do you think that there are situations in which it is excusable to act less than honestly? The unexpected, the confession, a case for the defense. 105. 105. We have read this 105, chapter number 5. Where is it? Let me see first. 105. Footprints without feet. Can a man become invisible? This is the story of a scientist who discovers how to make himself invisible. Does he use or misuse his discovery? The two boys started in surprise at the fresh, muddy imprints of a pair of bare feet. What was a barefooted man doing on steps of a house in middle of London? And where was the man? As they gazed, a remarkable sight met their eyes. A fresh footmark appeared from nowhere. Further footprints followed, one after another, descending the steps and progressing down the street. The boys followed, fascinated, until the muddy impressions became fainter and fainter, and at last disappeared altogether. The explanation of the mystery was really simple enough. The bewildered boys had been following a scientist who had just discovered how to make the human body transparent. Griffin, the scientist, had carried out experiment after experiment to prove that the human body could become invisible. Finally, he swallowed certain rare drugs, and his body became as transparent as a sheet of glass, though it also remained as solid as glass. Brilliant scientist though he was, Griffin was rather a lawless person. His landlord disliked him and tried to eject him. In revenge, Griffin set fire to the house. To get away without being seen, he had to remove his clothes. Thus, it was that he became a homeless wanderer without clothes, without money, and quite invisible until he happened to step in some mud and left footprints as he walked. He escaped easily. He escaped easily enough from the boys who followed his footprints in London, but his adventures by no means over. He had chosen a bad time of the year to wander about London without clothes. It was midwinter, the air was bitterly cold, and he could not do without clothes. Instead of walking about the streets, he decided to slip into a big London store for warmth. Closing time arrived. As soon as the doors were shut, Griffin was able to give himself the pleasure of clothing and feeding himself without regard to expense. He broke open boxes and wrappers and fitted himself out with warm clothes, soon with shoes, an overcoat, and a wide brimmed hat. He became a fully dressed and visible person. In the kitchen of the restaurant, he found cold meat and coffee, and he followed up the meal with sweets and wine taken from the grocery store. Finally, he settled down to sleep on a pile of quilts. If only Griffin had managed to wake up in good time, all might have been well. As it was, he did not wake up until the assistants were already arriving next morning. When he saw a couple of them approaching, he panicked and began to run. They naturally gave chase. In the end, he was able to escape only by quickly taking off his newly found clothes. So once more he found himself invisible but naked in the chill January air. This time he decided to try the stock of a theatrical company in the hope of finding not only clothes but also something that would hide the empty space above from soldiers. Shivering with cold, he hurried to Drury Lane, the center of the theatre world. He soon found a suitable shop. He made his way invisible upstairs and came out a little later wearing bandages round his forehead, dark glasses, false nose, big bushy side whiskers, and a large hat. To escape without being seen, he callously attacked the shopkeeper from behind, after which he robbed him of all the money he found. Eager to get away from crowded London, he took a train to the village of Epping, where he booked two rooms at the local inn. The arrival of a stranger at inn in winter was in any case an unusual event. A stranger of such uncommon appearance set all tongues wagging. Mrs. Hall, the landlord's wife, made every effort to be friendly, but Griffin had no desire to talk and told her my reason for coming to Epping is desire for solitude. I do not wish to be disturbed in my work. Besides, an accident has affected my face. Satisfied that her guest was an eccentric scientist, and in view of the fact that he had paid her in advance, Mrs. Hall was prepared to excuse his strange habits and irritable temper. But the stolen money did not last long, and presently Griffin had to admit that he had no more ready cash. He pretended, however, that he was expecting a check to arrive at any moment. Shortly afterwards, a curious episode occurred. Very early in the morning, a clergyman and his wife were awakened by noises in the study. Creeping downstairs, they heard the chink of money being taken from the clergyman's desk. Without making any noise and with a poker grasped firmly in his hand, the clergyman flung open the door. Surrender! Then, to his amazement, he realized that the room appeared to be empty. He and his wife looked under the desk and behind the curtains and even up the chimney. There was not a sign of anybody. Yet the desk had been opened and the housekeeping money was missing. Extraordinary affair, the clergyman kept saying for the rest of the day. But it was not as extraordinary as the behavior of Mrs. Hall's furniture. A little later that morning, the landlord and his wife were up very early and were surprised to see the scientist's door wide open. Usually it was shut and locked, and he was furious if anyone entered his room. The opportunity seemed too good to be missed. They peeped round the door, saw nobody, and decided to investigate. The bedclothes were cold, showing that the scientist must have been up for some time. The stranger still, the clothes and bandages that he always wore were lying about the room. All a sudden, Mrs. Hall heard a sniff close to her ear. A moment later, the hat on the bedpost leapt up and dashed itself into her face. The bedroom chair became alive. Springing into the air, it charged straight at her, legs foremost. As she and her husband turned away in terror, the extraordinary chair pushed them both out of the room and then appeared to slam and lock the door after them. Mrs. Hall almost fell down the stairs in hysterics. She was convinced that the room was haunted by spirits, and that stranger had somehow caused this to enter into her furniture. My poor mother used to sit in that chair, she moaned. To think it should rise up against me now. The feeling among the neighbors was that trouble was caused by witchcraft. But witchcraft or not, when the news of the burglary at the clergyman's home became known, the strange scientist was strongly suspected of having had a hand in it. Suspicion grew even stronger when he suddenly produced some ready cash, though he had admitted not long before that he had no money. The village constable was secretly sent for. Instead of waiting for the constable, Mrs. Hall went into the scientist, who had somehow mysteriously appeared from his empty bedroom. I want to know what you have been doing in to my chair upstairs, she demanded, and I want to know how it is you came out of an empty room and how you entered a locked room. The scientist was always quick tempered. Now he became furious. And you don't understand who or what I am, he shouted. Very well, I will show you. Suddenly he threw off bandages, whiskers, spectacles, and even nose. It took him only a minute to do this. The horrified people in the bar found themselves staring at a headless man. The Jaffers, the constable, now arrived and was quite surprised to find that he had to arrest a man without a head, but Jaffers was not easily prevented from doing his duty. If a magistrate's warrant ordered a person's arrest, then that person had to be arrested, with or without his head. There followed a remarkable scene as the policeman tried to get hold of a man who was becoming more and more invisible as he threw off one garment after another. Finally, a shirt flung into the air, and the constable found himself struggling with someone he could not see at all. Some people tried to help him but found themselves hit by blows that seemed to come from nowhere. In the end, Jafar was knocked unconscious as he made a last attempt to hold on the unseen scientist. There were nervous, excited cries of hold him, but this was easier said than done. Griffin had shaken himself free, and no one knew where to lay hands on him. Jewels. Griffin was rather a lawless person. Comment. How would you assess Griffin as a scientist? Would you like to become invisible? What advantages and disadvantages do you foresee if you did? Are there forces around us that are invisible, for example, magnetism? Are these aspects of matter that are invisible or not visible to the naked eye? Are there aspects of matter? What would the world be like if you could see such forces or such aspects of matter? What makes glass or water transparent? What is the scientific explanation for this? Do you think it would be scientifically possible for a man to become invisible or transparent? Keep in mind that writers of science fiction have often turned out to be prophetic in their imagination. The invisible man, as far as human eye can see, it happened tomorrow. The making of a scientist. The making of a scientist. Richard A. Bright has received the Searle Scholar Award and the Sechring Plough Award for biochemistry and molecular biology. It was his fascination for butterflies that opened the world of science for him.
At the age of 22, a former Scout of the Year excited the scientific world with a new theory on how cells work. Richard H. Bright and his college roommate explained the theory in an article proceedings of the National Academy of Science. It was the first time this important scientific journal had ever published the work of college students. In sports, that would be like making the big leagues at the age of 15 and hitting a home run your first time at a bat. For Richard Ebright, it was the first in a long string of achievements in science and other fields, and it all started with butterflies. An only child, Ebright grew up north of Reading, Pennsylvania. There was not much I could do there, he said. I certainly could not play football or baseball with a team of one, but there was one thing I could do: collect things. So he did, and did he ever. Beginning in the kindergarten, Ebright collected butterflies with the same determination that has marked all his activities. He also collected rocks, fossils, and coins. He became an eager astronomer too, sometimes stargazing all night. From first, he had a driving curiosity uh, along with a bright mind. He also had a mother who encouraged his interest in learning. She took him on trips, bought him telescopes, microscopes, cameras, mountaining material, and other equipment, and helped him in many other ways. I was his only companion until he started school, his mother said. After that, I would bring home friends for him, but at night we just did things together. Richie was my whole life. After his father died when Richie was in third grade, she and her son spent almost every evening at the dining table. If he did not have things to do, I found work for him, and not physical work, but learning things. His mother said he liked it. He wanted to learn, and learn he did. He entered top grades in school. On everyday things, he was just like every other kid. His mother said by the time he was in second grade, Everett had collected all 25 species of butterflies found around his hometown. Species and subspecies of butterflies collected in 6 weeks in Reading, Pennsylvania. That probably would have been end of my butterfly collecting, he said. But then my mother got me a book called The Travels of Monarch X. That book which told how monarch butterflies migrate to Central America opened the world of science to the eager young collector. At the end of the book, readers were invited to help study butterfly migrations. They were asked to tag butterflies for research by Dr. Frederick A. Orgwart of the University of Toronto, Canada. Ebright's mother wrote to Dr. Orgwart, and soon Ebright was attaching light adhesive tags to the wings of monarchs. Anyone who found a tagged butterfly was asked to send the tag to Dr. Urquhart. The butterfly collecting season around reading last 6 weeks in late summer. If you are going to chase them one by one, you won't catch very many. So the next step for Ebright was to raise a flock of butterflies. He would catch a female monarch, take her eggs, and raise them in his basement through their life cycle from egg to caterpillar to pupa and to adult butterfly. Then he would tag the butterfly's wings and let them go. For several years, his basement was home to thousands of monarchs in different stages of development. Number and kinds of butterflies collected in 6 weeks. Eventually, I began to lose interest in tagging butterflies. It is tedious and there is not much feedback. Bright said, in all the time I did it. He laughed. Only two butterflies I had tagged were recaptured, and they were not more than 75 miles from where I lived. Then in seventh grade, he got a hint of what real science is when he entered a country fair, a science fair, and lost. It was really a sad feeling to sit there and not get anything while everybody else had won something. Ebright said his entry was slides of frog tissues, which he showed under a microscope. He realized the winners had tried to do real experiments, not simply make a neat display. Already the competitive spirit that drives Richard Ebright was appearing. I know that for the next year's fair I would have to do a real experiment, he said. The subject I knew most about was the insect work I had been doing in the past several years. So he wrote to Dr. Ogwart for ideas, and back came stack of suggestions for experiments. Those kept Ebright busy all through his high school and led to prize projects in country and international science fairs. For his 8th grade project, Ebright tried to find the cause for a viral disease that kills nearly all monarch caterpillars every few years. Ebright thought the disease might be carried by a beetle. He tried raising caterpillars in the presence of beetles. I did not get any real results, he said, but I went ahead and showed that I had tried the experiment. This time I won. The next year, his science fair project was testing the theory that viceroy butterflies copy monarchs. The theory was that viceroys look like monarchs because monarchs don't taste good to birds. Viceroys, on the other hand, do taste good to birds. So, the more they look like monarchs, the less likely they are to become a bird's dinner. Ebright's project was to see whether, in fact, birds would eat monarchs. He found that a starling would not eat ordinary bird food. It would eat all the monarchs it could get. Ebright said later research by other people showed that the viceroys probably do copy the monarchs. This project was placed first in the geology division and the third overall in the country science fair. In his second year in high school, Richard Ebright began the research that led to his discovery of an unknown insect hormone. Indirectly, it also led to his new theory on the life of cells. The question he tried to answer was simple. What is the purpose of the 12 tiny gold spots on a monarch pupa? Everyone assumed the spots were just ornamental. Ebright said, but Dr. Orgward did not believe it. To find the answer, Ebright and another excellent science student first had to build a device that showed that the spots were producing a hormone necessary for the butterfly's full development. This project won Ebright first place in the country fair and entry into the International Science and Engineering Fair. There he won third place for the zoology. He also got a chance to work during the summer at the entomology laboratory of the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. As a high school junior, Richard Ebright continued his advanced experiments on the monarch pupa. That year, his project won first place at the International Science Fair and gave him another chance to work in the Army laboratory during the summer. In his senior year, he went a step further. He grew cells from the monarch's wing in a culture and showed that the cells would divide and develop into normal butterfly wings scales only if they were fed the hormones from the gold spots. That project won first place for the zoology at the international fair. He spent the summer after graduation doing further work at the Army laboratory and at the laboratory of the US Department of Agriculture. The following summer, after his fresh year at Howard University, Ebright went back to the laboratory of the Department of Agriculture and did more work on hormone from the gold spots. Using the laboratory's sophisticated instruments, he was able to identify the hormone's chemical structure. As year and a half later, during his junior year, Ebright got the idea for his new theory about cell life. It came while he was looking at X-ray photos of the chemical structure of a hormone. When he saw those photos, Ebright did not shout Eureka or even I have got it, but he believed that along with his findings about insect hormones, the photos gave him the answer to the biology's puzzles, how the cell can read the blueprint of its DNA. DNA is the substance in the nucleus of a cell that controls heredity. It determines the form and function of the cell. Thus, DNA is the blueprint for life. Ebrit and his college roommate James R. Wong worked all that night drawing pictures and constructing plastic models of the molecules to show how it could happen. Together, they later wrote the paper that explained the theory. Surprising no one who knew him, Richard Ebright graduated from Harvard with highest honors, second in his class of 1510. Ebright went on to become a graduate student researcher at Harvard Medical School. There he began doing experiments to test his theory. If the theory proves correct, it will be a big step towards understanding the processes of life. It might also lead to a new ideas for preventing some types of cancer and other diseases. All of this is possible because of Ebright's scientific curiosity. His high school research into the purpose of the spots on a monarch pupa eventually led him to his theory about cell life. Richard Ebright has been interested in science since he first began collecting butterflies, but not so deeply that he hadn't time for other interests. Ebright also became a champion debater and a public speaker, and a good canoeist and all around outside, outdoors person. He is also an expert photographer, particularly of nature and scientific exhibits. In high school, Richard Ebright was a straight A student because learning was easy. He turned a lot of his energy towards the debating and Model United Nations Club. He also found someone to admire Richard A. Weyherer, his social studies teacher and advisor to both clubs. Mr. Hare was the perfect person for me then. He opened my mind to new ideas, Ebright said. Richard would always give that extra effort, Mr. Wehrer said. What pleased me was here was this person who put in 3 or 4 hours at night doing debate research, besides doing all his research with butterflies and his other interest. Richard was competitive, Mr. Weir continued, but not in a bad sense. He explained Richard was not interested in winning for winning sake or winning to get a prize. Rather, he was winning because he wanted to do the best job he could. For the right reasons, he wants to be the best. And that is one of the ingredients in making of a scientist. Start with first rate mind and add curiosity and mix in the will to win for the right reasons. Ebright has these qualities. From the time the book The Travel of Monarch 10 opened the world of science to him, Richard Ebright has never lost his scientific curiosity. Robert W. Peterson, Leagues, Country, Starling, Entomology, Eureka, Canoeist, Starling, Common European Bird, Country, Leagues, Groups of Sports Clubs. How can one become a scientist, an economist, a historian? Does it simply involve reading many books on the subject? Does it involve observing, thinking, and doing experiments? You must have read about cells and DNA in your science books. Discuss Richard Ebright's work in the light of what you have studied. If you get an opportunity to work like Richard Ebright on projects and experiments, which field would you like to work on and why? Children everywhere wonder about the world around them. The questions they ask are the beginning of scientific inquiry. Given below are some questions that children in India have asked Professor Yaspal and Dr. Rahul Pal as reported in their book. Discovered questions. What is DNA fingerprinting? What are its uses? How do honey bees identify their own honeycombs? Why does rain fall in drops? Can you answer these questions? If you will find Professor Yaspal's and Dr. Pal's answers on page 75. You also must have wondered about certain things around you. Share these questions with your class and try and answer them. Journey by night. Children who made it big. School days. The necklace. Matilda is invited to a grand party. She has a beautiful dress but no jewelry. She borrows a necklace from a friend and loses it. What happens then? She was one of those pretty young ladies born as if through an error of destiny into a family of clerks. She had no dowry, no hopes, no means of becoming known, loved, and married by a man either rich or distinguished. And she allowed herself to marry a pretty clerk in the office of the Board of Education. She was simple, but she was unhappy. She suffered incessantly, feeling herself born for all delicacies and luxuries. She suffered from the poverty of her apartment, the shabby walls, and the worn chairs. All these things tortured and angered her. When she seated herself for dinner opposite her husband, who uncovered the tureen with a delighted air, saying, "Oh, the good put pie. I know nothing better than that." She would think of elegant dinners, of shining silver. She thought of the exquisite food served in marvelous dishes. She had neither frocks nor jewels, nothing, and she loved only those things. She had a rich friend, a schoolmate at the convent, who she did not like to visit. She suffered so much when she returned. She wept for a whole day from despair and disappointment. One evening, her husband returned elated, bearing in his hand a large envelope. "Here," he said, "here is something for you." She quickly drew out a printed card on which were inscribed these words: "The Minister of Public Instruction and Madame George Ramponneau ask the honor of Mr. and Mistress Loisel's company, Monday evening, January 18, at the Minister's residence." Instead of being delighted, as her husband had hoped, she threw the invitation spitefully upon the table, murmuring, "What do you suppose I want with that? But, my dearie, I thought it would make you happy. You never go out, and this is an occasion, and a fine one. Everybody wishes one, and it is very select. Not many are given to employees. You will see the whole official world there." She looked at him with an irritated eye and declared impatiently, "What do you know? What do you suppose I have to wear to such a thing as that?" He had not thought of that, he stammered. "Why, the dress you wear when we go to the theatre. It seems very pretty to me."